Hello, Lou Ann Vitas here from El Dorado Middle School, here to talk a little bit about functional behavior assessment, simplified form. The EMS 2.9 Club title might be a little confusing right now because it doesn't make any sense. However, I will explain that in a couple of slides. These are some resources that I have accessed in order to present this information. Dr. Terry Scott and George Sugai from PBIS, and some of the others you might recognize, CI3T organization. For El Dorado Middle School, let's start where we are on the PBIS spectrum regarding behavior interventions. We have a solid building-wide fidelity and consistency. Our Tier 1 is set pretty well, and we are at the point now where we're finding interventions and trying to find ways to help our Tier 2 kids and some of our Tier 3 kids as well. Like any other school, we do have some students that will be in those categories, and we are striving to find ways to get them going in the right direction. Here's the tier triangle from PBIS that talks about the 80% of students in Tier 1 and the 15% and the 5% at risk. Now, this is where I came up with the idea of 2.9 Club because Dr. Terry Scott says, let's don't concern ourselves with where the student falls on these categories of the triangle, but rather deal with interventions and behaviors that are needing to be taken care of for each individual student. So they could be high risk even if they're in the upper green area. So that's where I came up with the 2.9 Club. So to remind us that we don't necessarily have to concern ourselves so much with where on the triangle that they are. A formal FBA is a process that's much more complicated. And this is a quote directly from the Special Connections Special Education website at KU. It describes it as a process used to gather details about the events that predict and maintain a student's problem behavior. The purpose of the FBA is to provide information that will be used to design effective positive behavior support plans. To support a student who is engaging in problem behaviors in your classroom, it is important to consider the reasons why a student may be engaging in problem behavior. Behaviors are not repeated unless they serve a function for the student. It's a good definition of a formal. Now let's find out what we mean by a simplified FBA. The main difference is the fact that it is, in fact, simplified. It's based on a version that is less complex. It requires fewer outside personnel to participate, more streamlined documentation, and less formal. But the important thing to know is it uses the same line of thinking to get to the function of the behavior and to begin developing, implementing, and assessing the intervention. So why do we need interventions? This is another analogy that Dr. Terry Scott came up with, which is brilliant. He imagines a student as a snowball at the top of a snow hill, and this is a curve. We've seen these before in statistics, and he contends that a series of successes and failures will move this student one way or the other on the curve. Negative problems or little failures can cause a student to be kicked over to the left side. As that student continues to get small failures or large failures, they roll down the hill and gather momentum and size and do get further away from the top of the hill, which is where your typical student would be. We also have students that will receive a series of successes and start the momentum going the right way down the hill, the positive numbers. Those are the students that, if we keep that momentum going, will definitely end up as a productive citizen society. So we go back to the left side here and figure out how are we going to get those students back up the hill. It's going to take quite a few interventions, and they have to be effective to get that snowball to move up. The key areas for an intervention we want to predict and prevent, are controlling the environment, teaching replacement behavior, and providing functional consequences. This is what we call functional thinking versus rewards and punishments. If you think about what we do, we traditionally do rewards and punishments to try to get behavior to change. Dr. Terry Scott presents the idea that functional thinking is more effective because it creates permanent change. If we get to the root of the behavior, we can provide a replacement behavior and teach that behavior, and it becomes permanent change. Whereas rewards and punishments, a student's likely to just perform for a reward or to avoid a punishment and will not carry that knowledge to the next grade level or in life. It also predicts behavior as opposed to guessing. Sometimes we guess when we're doing rewards and punishments and we don't really get to the actual function. It also intervenes before too many failures occur, and that happens when we do rewards and punishments. If we wait until the student fails and then respond, that snowball gets pretty far down the left side. You're probably thinking right now, I'm not qualified to do functional behavior assessment. Well, yes, you are. You already do it intuitively. You do it all the time in the classroom when you're assessing your group, a large group or small group. And all you need is a few tools, hone your skills. One of the things that you already possess is the knowledge of the student in question and what behavior that is needing to change, and then the roadmaps that are provided for you here. Dr. Terry Scott and other behavioral specialists have created a simpler form of the FBA in our language, so we can start designing the easiest and most probable effective plans that will help students succeed. A modified approach to observations is another way of looking at it. The beauty of this process is that the analyzing of data begins and continues with people that already know the student in question. There's no need for outside observers, extra data collection, formal documentation. We use something called post hoc data analysis, meaning the people that know and already have experience with the student are the information. It can be any adult in the building, and the initial process can be accomplished in one team meeting or maybe two. The simplified FBA in the first part is to identify the behavior, and this is a flow chart that takes you through the thought process. If you notice, in the middle of the flow chart is the number 1. It says, what is the behavior? And then it takes you backwards to go find out when and where. And then it takes you forward for the why. Once you've exhausted all the information that you can for these 3 pieces, then you can move on. And to the next step would be to select a replacement behavior. Here's a method of development flowchart that helps you decide. So you decide what the replacement behavior is, and then you read through the flowchart and it tells you what direction to go and what method to choose. If you notice that there's a method 1 and a 2 and a 3, and there's a method that's combined a 1 and 2. Sometimes you are asked to actually teach the replacement behavior to the student, and then sometimes you're asked to make some adjustments to the environment or the contingencies. An ABC chart is called an antecedent behavior consequence chart. It's the one that I prefer because I like spreadsheets and I like one-page documents, and I feel that it's easier to record with. So this is how it works. An ABC chart is a direct observational tool that can be used to collect information about events that are occurring within the student's environment. And I'll show you an example here in a minute. Each column has its own reference. A refers to the antecedent or the event or activity that immediately precedes a problem behavior. The B column refers to the observed behavior, and the C column refers to the consequence or what actually happens as a result of that behavior. That directly comes from Special Connections website at KU. Here's an example of an ABC post hoc form. I like this because it has a place for time and date. It's very concise, and you've got your what happens before student behavior, and consequence and outcome. At the bottom of this form, when you're finished with all of the information gathering and analyzing, you have a place to write a summary of the function. Basically, you can state exactly what and pinpoint all the details of this particular intervention. When you go to design the intervention, there are some components that you can use to guide your thinking and help you come up with ideas that could make some adjustments for things like the physical room arrangement and rewards, tangible or non-tangible, and those kinds of things, reinforcements. Here's an example of an ARE, and I like this one because it gives me some ideas on each category and what kinds of things that you can do. Now you're thinking, what if this doesn't work? That happens sometimes, and if there is no rhyme or reason to the data that you collect, as a result of your analysis and you're not able to decipher the function, it's quite possible you are dealing with a much more complicated issue. And you never really know if a student behaviors are simple or complex until you try this. In such a case, it's time that a more formal assessment take place. And it was not a waste of time because it is a very good foundation for the very next level. Okay, well that is a quick overview of how to do a function-based assessment in the modified form. Let's try it. There are many, many tools and resources to help us. I think we should get started. Thank you for listening.